Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot. So today I thought it would be fun to share with you the decks that I brought into my collection in 2020 that have been hanging out on my wish list for quite some time. The majority of what we're going to look at today is still, at the time I'm filming this, out of print and maybe a bit hard to find. But let's go ahead and take a look at the decks that I finally crossed off my wish list this year. So the first deck that I want to talk about is the first out of print deck that I bought in January of 2020, and this is the Animals Divine Tarot. So this is one that I think I've showed many times on my channel. So this is a deck that I keep hoping that Llewellyn will at some point reprint because I think the structure of this deck is just amazing. This is of course a Lisa Hunt deck, and I think her artwork is very distinctive, and I can definitely tell every time I get one of her decks in my hand. I love the setup of this particular deck because in the majors and the courts, we have sort of deity aspects. So here we have Horus for the sun. And in the minors, the numbered minors, we have animals. And I really love that combination of sort of the kind of as above, so below. And this is the deck that really got me into working with animal decks, really helped me to appreciate animal decks. Working with decks that included deities, specifically goddesses, was always kind of a part of my practice, but I love that this one does also include the masculine divine as well. You can see here's a king, and then we had strength with Tara. So you can see that that's the kind of setup that it has, which I love the blend of those two things, the sort of the divine and the nature. It's kind of two aspects of the same coin as far as, you know, my personal practice is concerned. Kind of the as above, so below. I mean, we have the Spider Woman for the Hang Woman. We have Poseidon for the King of Cups. And I just think that this works really, really well. And I love that we have some kind of interesting animals that we don't normally see. So here in the Ace of Pentacles, we have the guinea pig, which I quite like because my children had guinea pigs when they were little. Beautiful snake for the Nine of Wands. This one hung out on my wish list for a really, really long time just because it is out of print and it's hard to get. But I was able to find a sealed copy for relatively inexpensively on eBay. It was brand new. It was still wrapped in the plastic. And so I feel like I really lucked out on that one. But this is definitely one that I would love to see Llewellyn reprint. We always talk about borders and whether it should be borderless or not. I think that in this case, you do kind of need the titles at the top and bottom. So I actually don't mind the borders on this deck, obviously, because I haven't taken them off yet. So this was the first deck that I was able to cross off my wish list in 2020, which just happened to be in January, and that is the Animals Divine Tarot. So in March of 2020, another deck that had been hanging out on my wish list for quite some time actually came back into print from US Games, and that's of course the Touchstone Tarot by Cat Black. Now this version is a little bit different from some of the previous versions and some of the different editions from other publishers. I do quite like the artwork in this deck. It is, of course, got this gold gilding. I do like the backs. I think they're quite beautiful. Hopefully that won't pick up too much shine because they are, of course, glossy. But I absolutely love the artwork on this deck. The borders, I get the point of. I know why they're there, and I do love that they look like portraits. I just wish they were a little bit smaller and the artwork was a little bit bigger. But I do really love this deck. I have been wanting this deck for quite some time, but it was out of print for a very long time and therefore not only hard to get a hold of, but very expensive. And so I was really excited to hear that US Games was re-releasing it. And I am so glad to be able to have it in my collection now. And of course, with it being a mass market deck that's been re-released, it's very easy to get a hold of and quite affordable, which is always wonderful. But I love these portraits. I love that they're close up. It kind of feels like a deck of kind of friends, which I think is something that Cat Black kind of mentions in the guidebook. I love her artwork, and I have quite a few of her decks now, and they are among my favorites for sure. But this one is one that was definitely hanging out on my wish list for a really long time because it was out of print. It went through various different publishers and various different publications. Unfortunately, this is the only version that I have, and I say unfortunately only because some of the other versions have some really beautiful production on them. This one is quite lovely, and I do really enjoy working with it. It's a little bit on the larger side, but given that it's kind of a portrait deck, I think it actually works quite well. I do have a full walkthrough of this deck on my channel if you're interested, so I'll leave that linked in the description box below. But this is definitely one that I was excited to be able to cross off my wish list in 2020. So that is the Touchstone Tarot by Kat Black. So in the summer of 2020, I had been watching some videos from Nina at Shuffled Tarot where she had talked about working with the Shining Tribe Tarot. Now, I believe this has had a couple of different editions under a couple of different names as well. This is the deck that was created by Rachel Pollack, and it does have a wonderful guidebook. Now, I have seen this deck not only in Nina's videos, but I've also seen where Renee at Meadowlark Mystic is doing a redraw of this. And ever since I've kind of been able to flip through her sketchbook, I've always been interested in this deck. But it was a little bit difficult to find, and I kind of waited around until I found one at kind of a decent price point, which I was able to do this summer. Again, I was lucky enough to get it still wrapped, so it is a brand new copy. It definitely has this kind of primitive art style that I like. You'll see that it's still in order because I do want to actually do a deep dive with this deck. It's very much hand-drawn. While the artwork is interesting and I do like it, it's very similar to some of the other decks that I have in terms of this kind of very primitive kind of rustic art style. Really where my interest lies with this deck is actually in its guidebook and really diving deep into that, and I just wanted to have the cards as well. This again I think has had multiple editions and kind of different names. This particular one has the red back with the two figures. They are reversible, which is nice, and it has this kind of faded yellow gradient to white border on it. Which I think kind of distracts a little bit from the artwork. So I may end up taking that off at some point because I feel like it's a bit distracting and I really want to be able to focus in on the artwork. But I'm excited to work with this one with the guidebook and really dive deep into it and get to know it. So that was another one that I was able to pick up this summer, which is the Shining Tribe Tarot by Rachel Pollack. I do believe it's out of print. There might be different kinds of editions out there. I will see what I can find and link it in the description box below for you. So one of the most exciting decks that I got to cross off my wish list for multiple reasons is the Fairytale Tarot by Baba Studios. This deck has been on my wish list for what feels like forever. I could never find a reasonable enough priced copy to go ahead and get it, but I absolutely love fairy tale decks, and I really wanted this one because I know the quality of the artwork and the stories that relate to these cards are really wonderful. And I was so generously gifted this by my dear friend Lisa Pepez, and we had done some kind of work with each other, and she knew that I was like on the hunt for this one and it was in her collection. I think she had even talked about it in one of her deck collection videos on her fairy tale decks where she talked about maybe being ready to pass this one on. And I'm so glad that I was able to bring it into my collection because the fact that it was Lisa's actually makes it all the more special to me. And it's really interesting because this has different card stock. It's a much earlier deck, I do believe, than some of the other Baba Studios decks that I have, such as the Bohemian Gothic or the Victorian Romantic Tarot, which those are the only two other Baba Studios decks I have. This cardstock is quite different. It's actually a lot thinner, but the colors are beautiful. The printing quality is beautiful. And it's been one that I really wanted to get my hands on, mostly to explore the cards in conjunction with the stories. And I know the Baba Studio guidebooks are really wonderful, so I'm really excited to kind of dive into this one. But like I said, it's a really, really special addition to my collection now because it was gifted to me by a very dear friend. Look at these stunning backs. They are beautiful. So that's another deck that I brought into my collection in the summer of 2020, which is just such a special treasure for me because it was my dear friend's deck. So heading into the fall of 2020, I knocked another few items off my wish list. This is the Mythical Tarot, the old 1986 edition, which I have been wanting for such a long time. I am not a fan of the new one. I think this artwork in this deck is absolutely amazing. I recently did a mod with me on Lisa's deck actually, and trimmed it completely down to the artwork, which I definitely plan on doing with mine because it is stunning, completely borderless. I just haven't done it quite yet because I wanted to leave it in its sort of original format for this particular video. I love this deck. I love the mythology of it. The guidebook is absolutely gorgeous. I was lucky enough to find another edition that was in pretty decent shape. It's got a pretty good bow to it, but it's held up quite well. The cardstock on this deck is really, really thin, so a lot of times when you find these, they're pretty well abused at that point. But this one is actually in pretty good condition. But when you see it borderless, it just really makes a huge difference. And so I'm really excited to go ahead and trim mine and to get it into my rotation so that I can use it because it's one that I've been wanting again for a really long time. It's again another out of print deck, so it is harder to find and tends to be a little bit costly when you do manage to get your hands on it, but I found one for a decent price, so I went ahead and jumped on it, and now I'm just really looking forward to being able to take the time to trim it. So another deck that I have had on my wish list for a really long time is actually the only oracle in this collection, and that's the Connected and Free, the Alchemist Oracle. Now this is a deck that I've seen many, many times around. It is currently out of print. I'm not sure what its status is in terms of whether or not it will be back in print, but I absolutely love the artwork in this deck. It does have a very similar feel to kind of the Wild Unknown or some of the other decks that I really love that have this art style. I think the keywords and the artwork in this deck are amazing, and I was lucky enough to find one for sale on Instagram actually. So real quick, thank you to the person who pointed me in that direction and to the person who sold me this deck because it is definitely a favorite of mine. I really enjoy working with it. I love the keywords, and for an oracle deck, I have to like the artwork too. That's important, but for an oracle deck, the keywords have to really mean something to me. They have to make a connection for me. And the keywords in this deck really do. And I find that they're quite versatile. So I feel like I can use this deck with a lot of different type of tarots or for a lot of different readings. I mean, look at this final step card. It's just, love that with the little mouse. I'm not thrilled with the copyright on the front, but you know, that's okay. I do like that it has chakra cards. Just, yeah, absolutely gorgeous artwork. There is a tarot deck by this same creator that again is also out of print, and it goes on and off my wish list. I'm like not 100% connected to that one yet, or committed, I guess I should say, to that one yet. But after working with this one, it's kind of inching its way more towards my wish list just because I'm really, really loving this oracle. I really want something that's quite balanced, just so I really enjoy that about this. So this is another one that was on my wish list for a very long time, and I'm excited to finally be able to have it, to be able to work with it, and that is the Connected and Free Alchemist Oracle. So the last deck that I have to share with you, I don't actually have in my possession at this time, and that is the Tarot of the Crone. Now, I have mentioned this deck multiple times on my channel, and I was finally alerted to the fact that it was being reprinted by the creator. And I, of course, jumped right on that and pre-ordered a copy. I believe it should be here anytime, but I didn't want to hold off on this video forever. So that is the last deck that I crossed off my wish list in 2020. Let's talk real quick about a couple of decks that are still on my wish list. And most of these, well, one of them is out of print. The other two are still in print, but I just haven't gotten to for whatever reason. So the first deck that's still on my wish list is the Alchemical Tarot, and that is a Robert M. Place deck, and I really want to get my hands on his decks, but I feel like I need to wait till I have the time to actually invest in working with them and learning them. And right now I have so many other decks on my study list that I'm kind of just holding off on that one. I really hope they don't go out of print while I'm kind of waiting. That thought does cross my mind quite often when I'm kind of trying to decide if I want to get a deck, particularly an indie deck, because they don't always stay in print. So the Alchemical Tarot is definitely a deck that I want to bring into my collection. Along the same lines of Robert M. Place's decks, like really any of his decks are kind of on my wish list. I would love to have the Tarot of Vampires. That's one that I haven't been able to get a hold of yet. It's not technically on my wish list, but it's one that I would really like to have at some point. So another deck that's on my wish list, because I haven't quite committed to it yet, is the Story Medicine Tarot. And that's one that I'm a little bit unsure about how it would work for me, mostly just because I have decks that I feel like are already really similar to that. In particular, I feel like my Black Lily Tarot, it kind of fills that same space that I feel like the Story Medicine Tarot, or her newer Animal Woman, I think is what it's called. I need to double check that name, but I feel like this deck really kind of hits that same spot for me, and I'm not sure that I would use the Story Medicine because I am quite attached to this one, and this is one that I've done quite a bit of work with. So I feel like they have kind of similar energies, and I feel like the Black Lily Tarot either might not get as much use if I bring the Story Medicine in, or it might make me not want to actually work with the Story Medicine tarot because I'm so connected to this deck. So the only other deck on my wish list is the Celtic Wisdom Tarot, and this one is totally out of print. I love Miss Matthews' decks. I really enjoy her approach to the tarot, and so that's one of the reasons why I would really like to have this particular deck. But again, it's another one that is out of print. It doesn't come up too terribly often, and when it does, it has a bit of a price tag to it for sure. So it's one that I haven't really ventured to get quite yet, but it is one that I would like to bring into my collection. The only hesitation with that one is really because I have a sort of Celtic, deck that I just absolutely love, but kind of has a little bit of the same sort of history and mythology to it, I think, although I don't have the Celtic Wisdom Tarot to compare it to, and so I really would like to eventually get my hands on that one so that I can kind of study it and look into it more, and maybe it would play really well with my Llewellyn Tarot, and I would just have that much more information to pull from with my readings, and that would be really cool. So that's a look at some of the decks that I was able to cross off my wish list in 2020. These were all the decks that I really, really wanted to bring into my collection, have been on my wish list for a really long time, but have just taken me a while to get a hold of for various reasons, mostly because they were out of print. All of these are currently out of print with the exception of the Touchstone Tarot, which has been reprinted by US Games, and then the Tarot of the Crone, which is currently being reprinted by its creator. But again, here we have the Animals Divine Tarot, the Touchstone Tarot, the Shining Tribe Tarot, the Fairytale Tarot by Baba Studios, the Mythic Tarot. I do want to mention that there is a new edition of the Mythic Tarot. It is called the New Mythic Tarot. The structure is the same. The layout is the same. The artwork is just by a different artist, so it does look a little bit different. And then we have the Connected and Free Alchemist Oracle. And lastly, the Tarot of the Crone, which I don't currently have, but it will hopefully be on its way to me very soon. Thank you for joining me today. You will find links for the decks featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.